The needle slipped through the velvet fabric with practiced ease, though Eleanor's fingers had long since gone numb from the cold. She sat in the corner of the drafty parlor, hunched over the midnight blue cloak that belonged to some wealthy gentleman she would never meet. Her eldest sister Millicent had brought the garment 3 days ago with strict instructions, gold thread only, intricate patterns along the hem and collar, completed within the week. Eleanor would receive 2 shillings for her labor. Millicent would keep the remaining 8 that the gentleman's valet had paid. The November wind whistled through the gaps in the window frame. Eleanor pulled her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders with one hand, while the other continued its steady work. Her breath formed small clouds in the frigid air. The fire in the hearth had died to embers hours ago. Millicent said coal was too expensive to waste on someone who contributed so little to the household. "You are awake, I see." Her stepmother's voice cut through the quiet morning like a blade. "I suppose you think sitting there with your needle makes you useful." Eleanor did not look up. She had learned years ago that eye contact only provoked more cruelty. "I am nearly finished with the cloak, ma'am. Just the final section of the collar remains." Prumph. The older woman's skirts rustled as she crossed the room. "Your father, God rest his foolish soul, left us with nothing but debts, and you, 3 daughters to feed, and you the most useless of all. 24 years old and still unmarried. What man would want someone so plain, so utterly without charm?" The words struck as they always did, but Eleanor had built walls around her heart. She focused on the needle, on the gleaming gold thread, on the perfect stitches that her mother had taught her before fever took her away, before father remarried, before everything changed. "Mrs. Winters from the village says her son is looking for a wife," her stepmother continued, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Of course he is nearly 50 and has a terrible limp, but beggars cannot be choosers, can they? You should be grateful anyone would consider you at all." Eleanor's hands trembled slightly, disturbing the smooth line of her embroidery. She took a slow breath and steadied herself. "Yes, ma'am. I will invite him for tea next week. You will be pleasant. You will smile. You will accept whatever offer he makes. We cannot support you forever." The older woman swept from the room, leaving behind the scent of rosewater and the weight of Eleanor's dread. The house had belonged to Eleanor's mother first. The cheerful yellow cottage on the edge of the estate had been her mother's dowry, her sanctuary. Now it felt like a prison. After father died 2 years ago, the stepmother had seized control of everything. Eleanor's older stepsisters, Millicent and Cordelia, had inherited their mother's sharp tongue and sharper ambitions. They attended parties in the village, flirted with merchants' sons, wore dresses that Eleanor had sewn with her own blistered fingers. Eleanor owned 3 dresses. All were patched and faded. She ate her meals after everyone else had finished, picking at whatever remained. She slept in the smallest room, barely larger than a closet, with a single thin blanket that never quite kept out the cold, and she embroidered. She sewed, she mended and created and transformed ordinary fabric into something beautiful. It was the only thing she had left of her mother, the only skill that made her valuable enough to keep. The gold thread caught the weak morning light as Eleanor worked. She created tiny roses along the collar, each petal perfectly formed. This cloak would keep someone warm. Someone would fasten it around their shoulders and feel the weight of it, the richness. They would never think of the frozen fingers that had crafted such beauty. They would never know her name, but Eleanor knew her own worth. Even if no one else did, each stitch was a small rebellion. Each perfect pattern was proof that she was more than they said. She might be poor, she might be plain, she might be unwanted, but she could create something extraordinary, and they could not take that away. Edward Ashford, Duke of Hertford, stood at the window of his London townhouse and stared at the rain-soaked street below. The house was enormous, 30 rooms, each more lavish than the last. Servants moved through the halls like shadows, anticipating his every need before he could voice it. He had more money than 3 generations could spend. He had a title that commanded respect and fear in equal measure. He had everything society said a man should want. And he had never felt more alone. His reflection stared back at him from the dark glass. At 32, he was considered quite handsome by the eager mammas who thrust their daughters at him during every ball and gathering. Dark hair, sharp features, tall and broad-shouldered. But when he looked at himself, he saw only emptiness. His eyes looked hollow. His smile, when he bothered to produce one, never quite reached those eyes. "Your Grace?" His butler, Matthews, appeared in the doorway. "Lord Pemberton has arrived for your appointment." Edward turned from the window. "Show him in." His cousin entered with his usual cheerful energy, a stark contrast to Edward's brooding. "Good God, Edward, this place looks like a mausoleum. Do you ever open the curtains?" "What do you want, Thomas?" Such warmth, such hospitality. Thomas threw himself into a chair without waiting for an invitation. "I want to remind you that Mother is hosting her annual autumn ball next week. She will be terribly offended if you do not attend. I am not in the mood for socializing." "You are never in the mood." "It has been 3 years, Edward. 3 years since Catherine died. At some point, you must rejoin the living." The mention of his late wife sent a familiar pain through Edward's chest. Catherine had been kind and good, and their arranged marriage had been comfortable if not passionate. Then fever had taken her within a week, leaving him with memories and guilt. Guilt that he had not loved her enough. Guilt that he felt relieved to be alone again. Guilt that he could not summon the kind of grief everyone expected. "I am perfectly content as I am," Edward said. "You are miserable. Everyone can see it. You attend to your duties, manage your estates, sit in Parliament, and then you come home to this tomb and brood." Thomas leaned forward. "You need something more, cousin. Purpose. Connection. Perhaps even love. Though I know that terrifies you. Love is for poets and fools. Love is for the living. And you, my dear Edward, are barely that." Thomas stood, straightening his waistcoat. "Come to the ball. Dance with some lovely young lady. Remember what it feels like to smile genuinely. If not for yourself, then for me. Mother will make my life unbearable if you refuse." Edward sighed. Thomas was persistent, and his aunt was even more so. "Fine, I will attend. But I will not dance, and I will not be paraded before every unmarried woman in London. I will take what I can get." Thomas grinned. "Oh, and bring that new cloak. Mother mentioned the embroidery is supposed to be exceptional. She wants to see it." The cloak. Edward had forgotten about it. His valet had commissioned something special from a local seamstress for the ball. He had not paid much attention to the details. Clothes were simply something one wore. But now he nodded. "Very well." After Thomas left, Edward returned to the window. Rain continued to fall, turning the streets to mud and the sky to grey. Somewhere in this vast city, people were laughing, loving, living. He could hear the echo of it, but he could not seem to find his way back to that world. Catherine's death had not broken him exactly. It had simply revealed what had always been true. He was good at duty, he was skilled at managing property and making decisions, but genuine warmth, real connection, the kind of love that poets wrote about, he did not know if he was capable of such things. The house felt too big around him, too empty. He had servants, but they were not companions. He had acquaintances, but few real friends. Thomas was the closest thing, and even his cousin kept a careful distance from the darkest parts of Edward's mind. He thought of the ball, thought of the bright lights and music and laughter. It would be torture, but perhaps Thomas was right. Perhaps he needed to at least try. He owed that much to his title, to his family name. The Duke of Hartwood could not hide forever. But as he stood there, in the fading afternoon light, Edward could not shake the feeling that he was waiting for something. Something he could not name. Some shift in the universe that would make everything make sense again. He did not believe in fate or divine intervention. He believed in duty and honor and hard work. Yet still, a small voice whispered in the back of his mind that his life was about to change. He dismissed the thought. That was the kind of foolish romanticism he had no patience for. Tomorrow would be the same as today, and the day after that would be the same as tomorrow. This was simply how life was. Manageable, predictable, safe, and utterly, completely lonely. Eleanor finished the cloak at dawn. She held it up to catch the early morning light, streaming through the parlor window. The gold thread glimmered against the deep blue velvet. The roses she had embroidered seemed almost alive, each petal detailed with such care that they appeared ready to bloom. It was, she knew without vanity, the finest work she had ever done. Her fingers ached. Her eyes burned from working by candlelight through the night. But she had created something beautiful. Is it done? Millicent appeared in the doorway, already dressed in a new gown that Eleanor had spent 2 weeks making. "Let me see." Eleanor handed over the cloak. Her stepsister examined it with critical eyes, turning it this way and that. For a moment, Eleanor thought she saw a flash of genuine admiration. But then Millicent's expression hardened. "It will do," she said coldly, though the collar could have been more elaborate. "I suppose we must work with the skills we have." She folded the cloak over her arm. "I will deliver it to the gentleman's household today. Here." She dropped 2 shillings onto the side table. The coins clinked together, the sound somehow mocking. "Your payment, spend it wisely." After Millicent left, Eleanor picked up the coins. 2 shillings for 6 days of work. For hours of careful, painful labor that had left her fingers raw and her back aching. She closed her fist around the coins. This was her life. This was all it would ever be. Unless she married the limping 50-year-old man. The thought made her stomach turn. But what choice did she have? She owned nothing, had no prospects, no relatives who might take her in. Her stepmother was right about one thing. Eleanor could not be supported forever. Eventually they would tire of her presence and turn her out. Then what? The workhouse? The streets? She walked to the small mirror hanging near the door. A pale, thin face stared back at her. Her hair was a dull brown, pulled back in a simple bun. Her dress hung loose on her frame. She was not ugly exactly, but she was not pretty either. Just ordinary, forgettable, the kind of woman no one looked at twice. "You are more than this," she whispered to her reflection. "You are more." But the words felt hollow. What did it matter what she believed about herself if the whole world disagreed? The Pemberton ball was everything Edward had dreaded. The ballroom blazed with candlelight from 3 enormous chandeliers. Women in jewel-toned gowns swirled across the dance floor in the arms of gentlemen in black evening wear. The air smelled of perfume and candle wax and ambition. Every unmarried woman in London seemed to be present, and every one of them had marked him as prey. "Your Grace, how lovely to see you." A woman in purple silk curtsied before him. He thought she might be a baron's daughter, but he could not remember her name. "Madam." He bowed slightly. "I was just saying to my mother that we have missed you at these gatherings. It is so good to see you rejoining society." Perhaps you might honor me with a dance. I do not dance. I am afraid. An old injury. It was a lie, but a convenient one. Disappointment flickered across her face before she recovered. Of course, Your Grace. Another time, perhaps. She drifted away, and Edward found himself cornered by a determined mama with 2 daughters in tow. He endured their conversation with practiced politeness, counting the minutes until he could escape. Thomas appeared at his elbow like a guardian angel. "Pardon me, ladies, but I must steal my cousin away. Family business, you understand." He steered Edward toward the refreshment table. "You look like you are being tortured." "I am being tortured." This was a terrible idea. Give it time. The night is young. Thomas grabbed 2 glasses of wine and handed one to Edward. "Oh, there is Mother. She will want to see that cloak." Lady Pemberton descended on them with the force of a small hurricane. "Edward, darling boy, you came. I am so pleased. Now let me see this famous cloak everyone has been talking about." Edward had worn the cloak over his evening clothes. He had not paid it much attention when his valet helped him dress. But now, as his aunt examined it under the ballroom lights, he actually looked at the garment. The embroidery was extraordinary. Gold roses climbed up the collar and cascaded down the front edges. Each flower was unique, detailed with such skill that they seemed 3-dimensional. The work was so fine, so delicate, that it must have taken days, maybe weeks. He ran his fingers over the stitching and felt the tiny ridges of thread. Someone had put their heart into this. "Exquisite," Lady Pemberton breathed. "Absolutely exquisite. Who did this work?" "My valet arranged it," Edward said. "Some seamstress in the city, I believe." "Well, whoever she is an artist. Look at the detail, Thomas. Each petal is perfect. I must find out who she is and commission something for myself." Edward continued to study the cloak as his aunt chattered. Something about the work touched him in a way he could not explain. There was love in these stitches. Care. Each tiny rose had been crafted by someone who believed in beauty even in the smallest details. Someone who worked with their hands and poured something precious into their labor. He wondered about the seamstress. Was she young or old? Did she work in a shop or in her home? Was she proud of this work? Did she know that her creation would be displayed at one of the season's most important balls? "You look thoughtful," Thomas observed after their aunt had moved away. "Do you ever wonder about the people behind the things we own?" Edward asked. "The seamstress who made this, the carpenter who built our furniture, the farmers who grow our food. We move through life surrounded by the labor of others, but we never think about them." "That is unusually philosophical for you, cousin. Perhaps I am changing." Edward said it lightly, but something had shifted inside him. Looking at this cloak, he felt connected to someone he had never met. Someone who had created beauty for him without knowing him. It was a strange feeling, uncomfortable, but also somehow warm. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of small talk and avoided dances, but Edward found his fingers returning again and again to the embroidered roses on his collar, and he found himself wondering about the hands that had created them. Were they young hands or weathered? Did they shake with cold or age? Were they gentle or strong? He would never know, of course. That was how the world worked. The wealthy and the workers existed in separate spheres, never touching except through the objects that passed between them. But for tonight, wearing this extraordinary cloak, Edward felt less alone. Someone, somewhere, had made something beautiful, and that gave him a small spark of something he had not felt in years. Hope. Eleanor's engagement to Mr. Winters was announced 3 days later. The limping 50-year-old had taken tea with the family, examined Eleanor like one might examine a horse at market, and pronounced her acceptable. The wedding would take place in 6 weeks. Eleanor would move to his small house in the village and keep his home, cook his meals, and warm his bed. In exchange, she would have food and shelter. It was, her stepmother said with great satisfaction, more than someone like Eleanor deserved. Eleanor said nothing. What was there to say? She had no dowry, no prospects, no alternative. She was 24 and utterly dependent. This was her fate. But that night, alone in her tiny room, she allowed herself to weep, silent tears that no one would hear. She cried for the life she would never have, for love that would never find her, for the dreams she had nurtured in secret, the hope that someday, somehow, things might be different. She thought of the cloak she had embroidered. Someone was wearing it now, some wealthy gentleman who had paid 8 shillings for her labor and thought nothing more about it. He would fasten it around his shoulders and attend some grand event, and he would never know about her, would never know that she had put every ounce of beauty and hope and longing into those gold stitches, that she had imagined foolishly that whoever wore it might somehow feel the love she had sewn into every rose. That was the fantasy of a child. The real world did not work that way. In the real world, people like her married men like Mr. Winters and learned to be grateful for small mercies. In the real world, handsome dukes did not notice the women who embroidered their cloaks. In the real world, there were no fairy tale endings. Eleanor wiped her tears and lay down on her narrow bed. Tomorrow would come, and the day after that, and eventually she would stand in a church and promise to honor a man she did not love, and her life would continue, small and quiet and forgotten. But tonight, just for tonight, she let herself imagine something different. She imagined a world where beauty mattered more than money, where kindness was valued above status, where someone might see the trembling hands that created extraordinary things and ask why they shook, where someone might care enough to ask her name. It was a foolish fantasy. But it was all she had. Edward could not stop thinking about the cloak. Days after the ball, he found himself running his fingers over the embroidered roses, marveling at the craftsmanship. He questioned his valet about the seamstress. The man explained that he had gone through a middleman, a woman named Miss Millicent Hartley, who collected fine needlework from various sources. The actual seamstress was anonymous, just another worker in the great invisible machinery that kept London running. But Edward wanted to know. The curiosity gnawed at him. He instructed his valet to arrange another commission, something more elaborate, and this time he wanted to meet the seamstress himself. He wanted to see the hands that created such beauty. His valet looked surprised but agreed. 3 days later, he returned with news. Miss Hartley had agreed to bring the seamstress to Edward's townhouse for a consultation. The new commission would be a set of waistcoats, elaborately embroidered. The meeting was arranged for the following afternoon. Edward felt oddly nervous as the appointed time approached. He changed his waistcoat twice, then felt ridiculous for caring. This was simply a business arrangement. He was curious about the craftsmanship. Nothing more. There was no reason for his heart to beat faster or for his palms to feel damp. At precisely 3 o'clock, Matthews announced the visitors, Miss Millicent Hartley and her sister, Your Grace. Edward stood as 2 women entered his study. The first was tall and handsome, dressed in a fashionable gown of green silk. She curtsied with practiced grace. Your Grace, such an honor. I am Millicent Hartley. I believe my work has pleased you. Your work? Edward frowned. I was told your sister was the seamstress. Oh yes, of course. This is Eleanor. Millicent gestured dismissively toward the second woman. Edward's gaze shifted, and his breath caught. She stood 3 steps behind her sister, nearly hidden. She wore a faded grey dress that had been mended many times. Her hair was pulled back severely from a pale, thin face. She kept her eyes lowered, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. But even in her obvious poverty and discomfort, there was something about her, a dignity in the straight line of her spine, a delicacy in her features that might have been beauty if she were not so thin, so clearly exhausted. And her hands were small and slim, with long fingers that bore the marks of her trade, small scars from needles, calluses from hours of work. They trembled slightly as she stood there. Those hands had created his cloak. Those hands had sewn hope and beauty into fabric. "You are the seamstress," Edward said softly. It was not a question. Eleanor's eyes lifted briefly to meet his, and he saw fear there. Fear and exhaustion and something that looked like resignation. "Yes, Your Grace." Her voice was quiet but clear, musical almost. Something in Edward's chest tightened. "The cloak is extraordinary," he said. "The finest work I have ever seen. You have remarkable talent." Color rose in her pale cheeks. "You are too kind, Your Grace." "I am never kind. I am merely honest." Edward moved closer, studying her more carefully. She flinched slightly, as if expecting a blow. The reaction made anger flash through him, though he did not know why. "I wish to commission more work. 6 waistcoats, each with different embroidered designs. The payment will be generous." "How generous?" Millicent stepped forward, inserting herself between Edward and Eleanor. "My sister's time is valuable, Your Grace, and she is soon to be married. Her time will be even more limited then." "Married?" Edward's gaze fixed on Eleanor. "Congratulations." Something flickered in those downcast eyes, not happiness. Something closer to despair. "Yes, a very suitable match," Millicent continued smoothly. "A respectable tradesman. The wedding is in 6 weeks, so you see, we must arrange the fee with that timeline in mind." Edward barely heard her. He was watching Eleanor's hands. They trembled more now, the fingers twisting together. She looked like a bird caught in a trap, small and fragile, and utterly without hope. He made a decision in that moment, one that defied logic and reason, one that would change everything. "I have a different proposal," Edward said. His voice came out cold, commanding, the voice of a duke who was accustomed to obedience. "Miss Eleanor will come work here in my household. She will complete the waistcoats and any other projects I require. In exchange, she will be housed and fed and paid a generous wage. The arrangement will last for 3 months. Millicent's eyes lit with greed. 3 months, and the compensation? I will pay her directly. £50. Eleanor gasped. It was a small sound, quickly suppressed, but Edward heard it. £50 was more money than she had probably seen in her entire life. £50, Millicent repeated, her voice sharp. That is quite generous, Your Grace. But Eleanor is engaged. Her fiancé will not approve of her living in another man's household. Then break the engagement. Edward pulled out his checkbook and wrote quickly. He handed the check to Millicent. Here is £100, 50 as a deposit for the work, 50 to compensate for any difficulty the broken engagement causes. Do we have an agreement? Millicent stared at the check. £100, more money than their household saw in 2 years. Her hand shot out and snatched it. Yes, Your Grace. We have an agreement. When should Eleanor begin? Tomorrow. She may bring whatever personal belongings she requires. My housekeeper will prepare a room for her. Throughout this exchange, Eleanor had not spoken. She stood frozen, her face pale, her eyes wide with shock. Edward turned to her. Is this arrangement acceptable to you, Miss Eleanor? She opened her mouth, closed it. Her hands were shaking violently now. Your Grace, I do not understand. Why would you? Because your work is exceptional and I value quality. Because I have many projects that require skilled hands. Because it pleases me to support talent when I find it. The words were true, but they were not the whole truth. The whole truth was something Edward himself did not fully understand yet. Something about her trembling hands and frightened eyes called to him. Something about her quiet dignity in the face of obvious poverty touched a place in his heart he had thought long dead. He wanted to help her, needed to, in a way that was urgent and irrational. You will be safe here, he added, more gently. I give you my word as a gentleman. You will work, and you will be treated with respect. Nothing more will be required of you. Eleanor searched his face. Whatever she saw there must have reassured her, because she nodded slowly. Then yes, Your Grace, I accept. Eleanor arrived at the Duke's townhouse the next morning with a single small bag containing all her worldly possessions. 2 dresses, 1 nightgown, a hairbrush, and her sewing kit. She stood on the front steps, staring up at the massive door, and wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. But then she remembered Mr. Winters, remembered his cold eyes examining her, remembered the future that awaited her as his wife, and she climbed the steps. A kindly-faced older woman answered the door. You must be Miss Eleanor. I am Mrs. Cooper, the housekeeper. His Grace has asked me to show you to your room and explain your duties. Eleanor followed the housekeeper through halls that seemed impossibly grand. Paintings in gold frames lined the walls. The furniture gleamed. Everything smelled of beeswax and fresh flowers. She felt like a stain on all this perfection, dirty and out of place in her faded dress. Here we are. Mrs. Cooper opened a door on the 3rd floor. This will be your room. Eleanor stepped inside and stopped breathing. The room was larger than the parlor in her stepmother's house. A real bed stood against one wall, piled with quilts, a wardrobe, a writing desk, a chair by the window that overlooked the garden. There was a fire burning in the fireplace, filling the space with warmth. Is this truly for me? Eleanor whispered. Mrs. Cooper smiled. His Grace was quite specific. You are to be comfortable. You will take your meals in the servants' hall or, if you prefer, in your room. Your work will be done here at this table by the window. The light is excellent. We will have Sundays free, and every evening after 6 o'clock is your own time. His Grace asks only that you work diligently during the agreed hours. Eleanor set her bag down with shaking hands. I do not understand. This is too much. I am just a seamstress. His Grace values your skill. He has been quite adamant that you should want for nothing. The housekeeper's expression softened. You have been treated poorly, I think. You are not used to kindness. But you will find this household runs on different principles. We do our work, and we are treated fairly. His Grace is a good master. After Mrs. Cooper left, Eleanor stood in the center of the room and turned in a slow circle. The bed beckoned. When had she last slept in a real bed? With real blankets? When had she last been warm? She sat on the edge of the mattress. It was soft, so soft. A sob built in her throat, but she swallowed it down. She did not have time for tears. She had work to do. She needed to prove she deserved this, whatever this was. She unpacked her few belongings and set up her workspace at the table by the window. The Duke had left samples of fabric for the waistcoats, rich silk and brocade in deep colors. He wanted floral designs, he had said. She could choose the specifics. Eleanor picked up a piece of emerald silk and ran her fingers over it. The texture was like water, smooth and cool. She could embroider golden vines and leaves, maybe small birds hidden among the branches. She could make it extraordinary. For the first time in years, excitement flickered in her chest. Real excitement. The joy of creating something beautiful, not because she had to, not to earn a few coins, but because someone actually valued her work. Someone who would wear what she made and appreciate the artistry. The Duke, Edward Ashford. She should not think of him by his given name, even in her mind, but she could not stop herself from remembering how he had looked at her, really looked at her, not through her or past her like most people did. He had seen her, and something in his dark eyes had been kind. "You are being foolish," she told herself sternly. "He is a duke. You are nobody. This is temporary. Do your work and be grateful." But as she threaded her needle and made the first stitch, she could not quite suppress the tiny spark of hope that had ignited in her heart. Edward found excuses to walk past the third-floor workroom over the next few days. He told himself he was simply checking on the progress of his commission. But the truth was more complicated. He wanted to see her again. The seamstress with the trembling hands and frightened eyes. He wanted to know if she was settling in, if she was comfortable, if the fear had faded from her expression. On the third day, he knocked on her door. "Miss Eleanor, may I come in?" There was a pause, then her quiet voice, "Of course, Your Grace." He entered to find her seated at the table, bent over a piece of emerald silk. She stood quickly, setting aside her work and curtsying. "Your Grace, is something wrong?" "No, nothing. I simply wish to see your progress." She gestured to the table. "I have completed the first waistcoat. The embroidery is finished. It only needs final assembly. I will begin the second tomorrow." Edward moved closer to examine her work. Golden vines and leaves covered the silk, intertwined with small birds, so delicate they seemed ready to take flight. It was breathtaking, even more beautiful than the cloak. "This is remarkable," he said softly. "Thank you, Your Grace." She stood with her hands clasped in front of her, her eyes downcast, the same posture she had held in his study. Submissive, fearful. "You need not be afraid of me," Edward said. "I will not harm you. I am not afraid." But her hands were shaking. "Then why do your hands tremble?" The question seemed to startle her. Her gaze flicked up to his face, then away. Color rose in her cheeks. They always shake, Your Grace. From the cold, from working too many hours without rest. I cannot seem to stop it." Something twisted in Edward's chest. He imagined her in some drafty room, hunched over her needlework, fingers numb and cramping, creating beauty while suffering. "Are you warm enough here?" he asked. "Yes, Your Grace. Perfectly warm. Mrs. Cooper keeps the fire well stocked. I am very comfortable." "And the meals? Are you eating well?" "Yes, Your Grace. The food is excellent." "Good. That is good." He felt awkward suddenly. He was not accustomed to caring about the well-being of his staff beyond ensuring they could perform their duties. But he cared about this woman, about her comfort and happiness. It made no sense. He noticed a book on the side table. "Do you read?" "When I can, Your Grace." "I found that in the library. I hope it was acceptable to borrow it." "Of course, take whatever books you wish." He picked up the volume. Poetry. Romantic sonnets. The kind of thing Catherine had enjoyed. "Do you like poetry?" "Very much. It reminds me that beauty exists in words as well as in fabric and thread." Edward smiled. It was the first genuine smile he had felt on his face in months. "That is a lovely way to think about it. Do you have a favorite poet?" Her eyes lit up for the first time. Wordsworth, I know it is terribly common, but his poems about nature make me feel less trapped, as if there is a whole world beyond walls and obligation. They talked for another 10 minutes about poetry and books. Eleanor forgot to be afraid. Her hands stopped shaking. She even laughed once. A light musical sound that made Edward's heart skip, and when he finally left, he found himself already planning his next visit. He was falling into dangerous territory. He knew it. She was a servant in his household, temporarily employed. She was beneath his station in every way. Society would be scandalized if they knew he was spending time with her, talking to her like an equal. But Edward discovered he did not care. For the first time in 3 years, he felt alive, actually alive. The emptiness that had filled him since Catherine's death was easing. And it was because of a pale, quiet seamstress with trembling hands and a love of Wordsworth. He should stop, should maintain proper distance, should remember his position and hers. But he could not, and he did not want to. The weeks passed in a rhythm that felt almost like happiness. Eleanor worked on the waistcoats during the day, pouring her heart into each piece. The Duke visited most evenings. Sometimes he brought books for them to discuss. Sometimes he simply sat in the chair across from her and talked about his day. She learned about his responsibilities, the weight of his title, the loneliness of his position. He learned about her childhood, her mother's kindness, the pain of losing everything after her father's death. They never touched, never crossed any line of impropriety, but something grew between them. Something warm and precious and fragile. Eleanor could not name it, dared not hope it was what it felt like, but her hands had stopped trembling. One evening, the Duke arrived with a large box. I have something for you. Eleanor looked up from her embroidery, surprised. Your Grace, you have already given me so much. I need nothing more. Nevertheless, he set the box on the table. Open it. She did, her fingers fumbling with the ribbon. Inside were 3 dresses, beautiful gowns in soft colors, blue like the sky, rose like dawn, cream like fresh milk. They were simple but well made, with fine stitching and good fabric. I cannot accept these, Eleanor said, though her heart ached with wanting them. You can, and you will. The dresses you own are falling apart. You deserve clothing that does not shame you. I am not ashamed, but you should not have to be. Edward's voice was gentle, but firm. You are skilled and intelligent and kind. You should have things that reflect your worth. Please. It would please me greatly if you would accept them. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. No one had given her a gift in years. No one had thought about what would please her or make her happy. She looked up at the Duke, at his dark eyes that watched her with such unexpected tenderness, and something in her chest cracked open. Thank you, Your Grace, she whispered. Thank you, Edward, he said suddenly. When we are alone, please call me Edward. She shook her head. That would not be proper. Hang propriety. I am tired of walls between us. You are not just a servant to me, Eleanor. You are... He stopped, as if the words were too dangerous to speak. You are important to me. Your opinion matters. Your happiness matters. I want you to feel free to speak to me as a friend, not as a master. Friends, Eleanor repeated. Was that what they were? It felt like more. It felt like something bigger and more terrifying and more wonderful. Yes, friends. Edward smiled. Will you accept my friendship? Eleanor nodded. Yes, yes, I will. From that night forward, something shifted. They were still careful, still proper, but there was an ease between them now. Eleanor no longer feared his presence. She looked forward to their evening conversations, and Edward found himself rushing through his daily obligations so he could return home to her, to the woman who made his empty house feel like something close to a home. It was Thomas who noticed the change in Edward first. "You are smiling," he said one afternoon, staring at his cousin in disbelief. "Actually smiling? What has happened?" "Nothing. I am simply in a good mood." "You are never in a good mood. Something has changed. Is it a woman?" Edward felt heat rise in his face. "Do not be ridiculous. It is a woman." "Good God, Edward. Who is she?" "Please tell me it is someone suitable. Mother will have my head if you develop an attachment to someone inappropriate." "There is no attachment. I have simply commissioned some embroidery work. The seamstress is talented, and I enjoy discussing art with her." Thomas's eyebrows rose. "You are discussing art with a seamstress? In your home? How very progressive of you. Do not make it into something it is not." But Thomas's words haunted Edward. What was Eleanor to him? A friend? More than that? He thought about her constantly, counted the hours until he could see her again, felt his heart lift when she smiled, felt protective and possessive and tender in ways that made no sense. He was falling in love with her. Perhaps had already fallen. The realization struck him one evening as he watched her embroider by firelight. She had been telling him about a bird she had seen in the garden, her face animated, her hands graceful as they worked. And Edward looked at her and thought, "I could watch you do this every evening for the rest of my life and never grow tired of it." Love. He loved her quiet strength, loved her kindness, loved the way she found beauty in small things, loved the sound of her laughter, loved the trembling hands that created such extraordinary beauty. But what could he do with this love? He was a duke. She was a seamstress from a poor family. Society would never accept her. His peers would mock him. His family would be horrified. And yet, he could not imagine his life without her now, could not imagine returning to the cold emptiness that had defined his existence before she came. He would have to make a choice, duty or love, his title or his heart. For the first time in his life, Edward was not sure which path to take. Eleanor knew she was in love on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Edward had come to her workroom drenched from an unexpected storm. Mrs. Cooper had brought towels, and Eleanor found herself helping him dry his hair without thinking. Her hands were in his dark hair, and his eyes had closed at her touch, and something so tender had passed between them that she could barely breathe. "Eleanor," he had whispered, and the way he said her name made her heart stop. But he had not said anything more, had simply stood and left, as if afraid of what might happen if he stayed. That night, Eleanor lay in her comfortable bed and faced the truth. She loved Edward Ashford, loved him completely, impossibly, hopelessly. He was everything good and kind, everything she had dreamed of without knowing such men existed. He saw her, valued her, made her feel like she mattered. But he was a duke, and she was nobody. There could be no future for them. In a few weeks her 3 months would be up. She would receive her payment and return to her stepmother's house, return to her small, hard life, perhaps marry someone like Mr. Winters after all. And Edward would forget her, would marry some elegant lady of quality, would have children and grow old in his grand houses. And Eleanor would have these few precious weeks to remember for the rest of her life. The thought broke her heart, but she could not regret it. These weeks with Edward had shown her what love could be, what kindness looked like, what it felt like to be valued. Even if it ended, even if it hurt, She would not trade this experience for anything. She only wished she could tell him. Wished she could say, I love you so much that it frightens me. I love you in a way that makes everything else seem small and unimportant. But she could not. So she poured her love into her work. She embroidered the final waistcoat with all the longing in her heart. Golden roses and thorns intertwined, beauty and pain together, and she hoped that somehow when he wore it, he would feel what she had put into every stitch. The crisis came suddenly. Eleanor's stepmother arrived at the townhouse unannounced, demanding to see her. Edward was out, and Eleanor had no choice but to receive her in the main parlor. 3 months are nearly up, her stepmother said without preamble. You will return home tomorrow. I still have 1 week remaining, Eleanor replied, trying to keep her voice steady. 1 week or 1 month makes no difference. Mr. Winters is growing impatient. The wedding has been delayed long enough. You will come home, marry him, and stop this foolishness. I have a contract with His Grace. His Grace. Her stepmother's voice dripped with venom. Do you think he cares about you? You are a servant, a means to an end. Whatever fantasy you have built up in your foolish head, it is not real. Men like him do not marry women like you. Each word was a dagger. Eleanor felt them strike true because they echoed her own fears. I know my place, do you? Because the way you speak of him, the way your face glows, you have developed feelings. How pathetic, how utterly predictable. Her stepmother stood. You will come home tomorrow. If you refuse, I will go to His Grace and explain that you have been behaving inappropriately, that you have seduced him, or attempted to. His reputation will be damaged, and you will be thrown out with nothing. Is that what you want? Eleanor's blood ran cold. You would not. Watch me. You have been given more than you deserve. This ends now. After her stepmother left, Eleanor sat in the parlor and shook. Not with cold, but with fear. She believed the threat. Her stepmother was cruel enough and greedy enough to do exactly as she promised. If Eleanor stayed, if she fought, Edward would be hurt. His name would be dragged through society's muck. He would suffer because of her. She could not let that happen. Could not allow her love to damage him. There was only one choice. She had to leave. Tonight, before Edward returned. Before she lost her courage, Eleanor went to her room and packed her few belongings with trembling hands. She left the beautiful dresses folded carefully on the bed. She did not deserve them. She took only what she had arrived with. On the table she left the completed waistcoats and a note. Your Grace, thank you for your kindness. I will never forget it. Please do not look for me. This is for the best. Eleanor. She wanted to write more, wanted to pour out her heart. But what was the point? Some stories did not have happy endings. Some love was not meant to be. She slipped out of the townhouse like a ghost, leaving behind the only happiness she had ever known. Edward returned home to find Eleanor gone. Mrs. Cooper handed him the note with worried eyes. He read it once, twice, 3 times. The words did not change. When did she leave? This afternoon, Your Grace. Shortly after a woman came to visit her. The woman seemed angry. Miss Eleanor was very upset after she left. Fury swept through Edward. He knew without asking who the woman had been. Eleanor's stepmother. She had threatened Eleanor, had forced her to leave. Prepare my horse, Edward commanded. Your Grace, it is nearly dark. Now. He rode through the streets like a madman, his heart pounding. He could not lose her. Would not. He finally understood what mattered. Not his title, not society's expectations, not duty or honor or any of the things he had built his life around. Eleanor mattered. Her happiness, her safety, her love, because he loved her with everything in him, and if she would have him, he would defy the entire world to keep her. He found her on the road leading out of London, walking with her small bag. She looked so small and lost. When she heard the horse, she turned, and her face crumpled when she saw him. "Edward, your grace, please. You should not be here." He dismounted and strode toward her. "What did she say to you? What threat did she make?" "It does not matter. I am leaving. I have to." "Like hell you do." Edward took her shoulders gently. "Tell me." Through tears, Eleanor explained the threat to his reputation, the forced marriage, the impossible choice. When she finished, Edward pulled her close, holding her tight against his chest. "You foolish, wonderful woman, do you truly think I care about gossip? Do you think I would let you go without a fight? But your reputation is worth nothing without you." He pulled back so he could see her face. "I love you, Eleanor. I have loved you since the moment I saw your hands trembling and wondered why. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you find beauty in everything. I love you completely, and I will not let you go." Eleanor stared at him through her tears. "You cannot love me. I am nobody, nothing. You are everything. You are the reason I wake up each morning, the reason I smile, the reason I believe in beauty and goodness again." Edward dropped to one knee in the muddy road, still holding her hands. "Marry me, Eleanor, not because you have to, not because of duty or contract or obligation, but because I love you with all that I am, and I want to spend every day of my life making you as happy as you have made me." "The society will never accept me," Eleanor whispered. "Then society can go to hell. I am the Duke of Heartwood. I choose my own bride, and I choose you. Always you." He searched her face. "Do you love me? Even a little?" "I love you more than I thought possible," Eleanor confessed. "I love you so much I can hardly breathe." "But Edward—" "No buts, just yes or no. Will you marry me?" Eleanor looked at him kneeling in the mud, this powerful man who was offering her everything, and she thought of her trembling hands that had embroidered his cloak, never imagining that they would one day touch his face in love. She thought of all the pain and loneliness that had led her to this moment, and she thought of the future bright and impossible and real. "Yes," she said, "yes, I will marry you." Edward surged to his feet and kissed her. Right there on the muddy road, he kissed her like she was precious and perfect, and Eleanor kissed him back, tasting tears and hope and love. The wedding took place 1 month later. Society was scandalized. How could the Duke of Heartwood marry a common seamstress? The gossip raged. Some peers refused to attend. Edward's aunt was shocked but ultimately supportive when she saw how happy he was. Thomas stood as best man with a knowing grin. Eleanor wore a gown she had made herself, embroidered with gold roses that caught the light. She walked down the aisle of the chapel and saw Edward waiting for her, his eyes full of love. Nothing else mattered. They were married before God and witnesses, and when Edward kissed his bride, applause filled the chapel from the servants and common folk who had been invited, because this was a different kind of wedding, a union built not on status or wealth, but on genuine love. Eleanor became the Duchess of Heartwood. She moved into the grand townhouse, not as a worker, but as its mistress. She was terrified at first, overwhelmed by the responsibilities and the scrutiny, but Edward was patient. He taught her what she needed to know. He defended her against cruel whispers. He loved her openly and proudly. And Eleanor bloomed. Her hands, No longer trembling, still created beautiful embroidery, but now she worked for pleasure, not for survival. She established a program to help poor seamstresses and needleworkers, paying them fairly and treating them with dignity. She became known for her kindness and her charity. Slowly society accepted her. Some even admired her. But Eleanor did not care about society's approval. She cared about the man who sat across from her at breakfast, who still brought her books of poetry, who looked at her like she was the most precious thing in his world. She cared about the life they were building together, the love that grew stronger every day. 1 year after their wedding, Eleanor stood in the nursery, her hand resting on her swollen belly. Edward came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her, his hand covering hers. "Are you happy?" he asked softly. "I never knew life could be this good," Eleanor said honestly. "I never imagined I could feel this much joy." "Neither did I. You saved me, you know. I was drowning in emptiness. You pulled me back to life." Eleanor turned in his arms, looking up at his beloved face. "We saved each other." "Yes," Edward kissed her forehead. "We did." In the years that followed, they would have 3 children. They would grow old together in their manor house in the country, surrounded by gardens and laughter and love. Eleanor's stepmother and stepsisters faded into irrelevance, their cruelty forgotten. The Duke and Duchess of Hartwood became known for their love story, the unlikely marriage that defied all odds. But on quiet evenings, when they sat by the fire, Eleanor would sometimes take out the midnight blue cloak with its gold-embroidered roses, the cloak that had started everything. She would run her fingers over the stitches she had sewn with frozen, trembling hands, back when she thought she was creating something for a stranger. And Edward would watch her, remembering the moment he had seen those trembling hands and wondered about the woman behind them. The moment his life had changed forever. "I love you," he would say, because he never tired of saying it. "I love you," she would answer, because the words never lost their power. They had both been broken, both lost, but they had found each other, and in finding each other, they had found home. They had found healing. They had found the kind of love that only comes once in a lifetime. The kind of love that starts with trembling hands and ends with 2 hearts beating as one.